Hot Take Thursdays. Starting off with, I think that PvE should be prioritized over PvP. So, this is a tough one to crack right off the bat. Whoever posted this, you gave me kind of a tough, start. I think it's that the main thing here is, so let's talk about in terms of what exactly, right? Are we talking weapon balance? Are we talking maps, content, longevity, sandbox stuff? You know, what are we trying to discern here? Given overall, I think Bungie already puts a really good position on the fact that it is already prioritized. I think that PvE is already given some amount of freedom to exist and permeate within itself, even when there are issues. If the issues are in our favor, Bungie doesn't fix them until way later. They kind of lower priority things. What this person might be feeling, and I'm not sure, is they might be feeling that sense of anytime anything in PvP becomes too strong, it gets nerfed, and then that does affect the PvE sandbox usually. And we've all felt that, and we are starting to see that slowly change when it comes to specific damage numbers and certain other things. I think that's really important, especially in regards to stasis. I don't think that there should ever be a priority in terms of it should always be PvE, it should always be PvP, because I think that's unfair to the players that are invested into one side or the other. I think that we need good holistic seasons that have an emphasis on one over the other, because the game would not survive without it. It all cohabitates within itself. So we need both sides of the game to exist in order for the game to do well. And the more players that we're getting into the game overall is just a better experience for all of us. So I think that it's not that we should see priority to PvP or PvE. It should be that we need more emphasis on direct. This is more of a PvE season. This is more of a PvP season. It gives us the opportunity to weigh out how much we're going to be playing that season, look at other things that we might want to play. If Bungie wants us playing the game all the time, then we need to make sure that we're being invested in a meaningful way. And so the priority system should never be PvE or PvP. It should be the players. And right now, and I know a lot of players in my core group might not play a lot of PvP. I know that they desperately need attention. And if I were to say a priority needed to happen right now, I think that we need a PvP priority system right now. I think the health of the game depends on PvP thriving to some capacity. Whether it's competitive or not, we'll continue to address as this moves on, as Destiny becomes more of the game that it is, as this more MMO-esque game, and they are developing this new competitive IP. We will see the direction. But for right now, we desperately need some love and attention to that. DMT needs nerf. If you're talking PvP exclusively, I've heard that it's rather strong. I myself haven't seen it, but I don't play a lot of PvP. From what I have seen and understood, is it rewards gameplay that is less fun, I guess. So I think that DMT might need a small tuning, but I don't know if it needs to be nerfed into the ground. I like that it exists. I like the power fantasy of the weapon a lot. I like that it is a cool change to how you can play the game. But like stasis, it might need to come down a bit in terms of power level. Bungie destroys PvE for the sake of PvP over and over. Subclass nerfs, exotic nerfs, etc. change my mind. So we kind of touched on this before. I'll reiterate that the game exists to cohabitate with its other game modes. The designers have said repeatedly now that the sandbox will never truly be separate. They want the game to feel the same across all game modes. So when I play my Guardian in one aspect, it feels the same in all aspects. I will say that we have in the past definitely seen subclass nerfs or changes based on the PvP response. Things get shut off automatically if it affects PvP, and they can't just shut it off for one game mode or the other. It just has to get completely shut off. Looking at you, Bleak Watchers. But I do think that in terms of how we play Destiny in PvE, in PvP, the varying degrees of difference are very much so. Like in PvE, we want to feel extremely powerful and really broken, and PvP kind of like creates this tethering mechanic, right? So I sit here and I'm not allowed to break this tether. If I do, then one of these things goes far and away above the other, and it ruins the other one, right? So they do exist to sort of help each other maintain balance and maintain the same feel across all game modes, and keep this consistency. I will say that subclass nerfs and exotic nerfs have happened due to PvP, but I've also seen the flip side where PvE, we have gotten things that nerfed that maybe shouldn't have been nerfed in regards to like PvP. Skull of Dire Amkara, Orpheus Rigs, Phoenix Protocol, all these exotics that generate super based on recasting supers were nerfed entirely due to the PvE environment. And various other things have been nerfed due to the PvE environment. It just feels like when the PvP community does a lot of complaining that they seem to have their voices heard. But I don't think that's in response to specifically PvP. I think it's just one of those things where we hear those voices more, and it feels like they're catered to more, because why would we complain about something being strong in PvE? Because because there's no need to, right? Well of Radiance is a prime example of something that is way overtuned and way too strong, that has not received a nerf or won't be touched due to the fact that it's really only strong in one aspect of the game, and that's PvE. PvP requires more balancing acts, so things will get nerfed more likely there, and things that are strong there will see more tuning there, right? But generally speaking, I would say that Bungie's done a good job of differentiating subclasses and trees to the PvP side of things and keeping the power fantasy on PvE. With a few exceptions being like Nova Warp, which really wasn't seeing PvE use anyways. I would say that things that are used in PvP generally aren't also used in PvE, and so the degrees of meta are so often different that things that get nerfed in PvP are very unlikely to affect PvE. Before Bungie, or since Bungie is removing 3-peaking, they should come up with a way to deal with cheaters. 3-peaking is one of the only ways that people can attempt to deal with cheaters. I think that we are going to see, because the 3-peaking isn't being removed until season 15, I believe that we're going to see updates to anti-cheat then or in Witch Queen. I would say that unfortunately, cheaters being so relevant on PC, this is a very PC specific thing. But on console, 3-peaking is very dominant without the exorbitant amounts of cheating. So I think that this is such a narrow thing to focus in on when they do have to balance this game across a lot of platforms. And so 3-peaking is very strong and very, very, very like relevant across all platforms. And while cheating is something that it needs to be a priority, again, 3-peaking is not something that is related to anti-cheat. So those are two different teams, right? Anti-cheat is a much harder nut to crack and something they can't really discuss with an outside community, because the more we know, the easier it is to break. Unfortunately, cheating will exist regardless of what they do. They can mitigate it as much as possible, but if you look at other games that are in a similar situation as Bungie is now, cheating is extremely rampant with very little consequence. And that is not Bungie's fault per se, because it's hard to come up with a consistent way to respond to that. And the more the anti-cheat, the heftier the anti-cheat, the more invasive to your PC it can be, and the more likely your account will get banned for some really stupid things. So it is very much so a balancing act on this front. While 3-peaking may be an answer, anti-cheat is definitely a thing that we know is on their priority list. I've seen multiple times now where they are employing people now, increasing their anti-cheat response team, trying to get people in and working on that as much as they can. Unfortunately, I think this is just going to be something that either we're going to see 3-peaking and anti-cheat increased in the same season or shortly thereafter. And while, yes, they do need to come up with a deal with cheaters, we're just stuck in a holding pattern until they can come up with something. And that is just the nature of game development. And as much as PvP suffers from cheaters, it was suffering, I think, more from the player base not existing. Cheaters are still rampant. They will be rampant, but I think now with the tuning that they've done and the positive results we've had from stasis, now the stasis nerfs, I think that has been effective in dealing with a lot of that, and increasing player population in your game modes is one way to combat cheating. Unlimited power levels, quote unquote, from the artifact was a bad idea. I don't really have a hot take on this. I agree. I think it was poorly executed. It sort of invalidates the whole armor grind, the pinnacle grind. I don't need to do it. The only time it really doesn't matter in the game, because like contest is the thing that most players that are hardcore care about anyways. So all it does is it kind of like lets you play catch up if you aren't doing that. There's nothing that takes advantage of the fact that we can gain these unlimited levels. We just do it kind of for bragging rights, and even then it's really kind of like, well, how like what did you gain? It'd be cool to see a game mode that utilizes the unlimited power levels, or remove that entirely and let us go back to the true grind. But there's other issues with the true grind that players are already upset with, so this kind of like is a nice intermediary answer to that, where like I can't hit 1320 base without my artifact, but like I could be 1319 and have an extra level on my artifact and still be okay. That doesn't take away from the issue with the current loot system, but it does at least help alleviate some of the stress of needing to grind incessantly. It just gives an alternate route to the same mean. The difference is you choose an artificial mean versus a permanent one, and I think that's kind of a unique way to handle the RNG factor, right? Like if I put in enough time, my artifact will level me anyways. So if you look at it through that lens, if you look at it through, okay, I'm going to be grinding my armor anyways. Oh man, I got 3 arm pieces in a row. That really sucked. My RNG is terrible. Hey, here's this thing to help mitigate some of that RNG. It kind of does that artificially for us. And so throughout the season, it also frees up resources. The higher your artifact is, the lower weapons you can have, etc. But again, I would like to see something that actually utilizes those levels. There's really not a need for them anymore. Like there was when they first came out with it. It just feels very clunky and not executed well, just like a response to something that they didn't need to respond to. All right, here's a big one. Destiny is slowly becoming boring. Yes, the story is getting so much better, but the gameplay is getting stale. Stasis was a great change, then was nerfed because it was too overpowered in PvP, correctly so. But it seems so like there has been too much focus on patching holes in the sinking ship that is PvP in the last year. So much so that other areas of the game are beginning to significantly struggle. And I understand that there are different teams that work on different areas. Look at Gambit, for example. When was the last time something of substance happened there? All they have done in the last 2-ish years was combine Prime and Regular. A lot of other aspects of the game are beginning to struggle, and it seems like no one really wants to acknowledge it or talk about it, because all the focus is on PvP, which is where the loudest voices are. PvP at this point is becoming cancerous to the body as a whole and is slowly squeezing the life out of it. It is time to cut it out and for Bungie to cut their losses on it. PvP should not be removed from the game, but it should be cut out until they can fix the 1001 problems that plague the whole playlist before it slowly kills the game completely. I say this from a standpoint of having thousands of hours in this game and from a place where I genuinely love this game. But over the last year or so, it has been that enjoyable, it's almost like a toxic relationship. I believe they meant to say it hasn't been that enjoyable. You take a break, then think it's going to be better, and it doesn't, so you get burned over and over again. Thank you and welcome to my TED Talk. Okay. A lot to unpack. I like this. So, I don't think Destiny is becoming boring. I think there is, when you say that you have 1,000 hours in a game, or thousands of hours in a game, that has like reshuffled itself a lot in its lifespan, it's going to feel boring because you miss things or you want things to be a certain way, and there isn't ever it's very nebulous when in terms of it feels like, okay, cool, raiding was the thing to do, and then they kind of took that out, like took stuff out of doing the raids and like making raid end game content and like making Nightfall's end game content, and like what was the reasoning behind that. And now we're starting to go back to this end game raid is like is a thing. 1320 VOG is a big deal because it's max power level, right? Like there's that. There's master raids coming, and we have all of that. To say that a lot of the stasis changes, right, were directly targeted to PvP and very little actually affected PvE. There were a couple things that were definitely like, it definitely hit both sides of the ship, but I don't think it was anything worth writing home about. I would say that PvP has been more than a sinking ship and has been so ignored that we're beginning to see the fruition of the frustrations of the player base and realizing that PvP is one of the ways that players can continue to invest their time and improve in while waiting for more content, right? So the loop should be play through the PvE content. Okay, cool, do my 3 raids a week, whatever, and then move into the PvP side, and then okay. But if you don't like PvP, the avenue is very different, right? So, but here's the thing. Is this avenue of going to do my raids and then into PvP until the next content, right? This shifting back and forth between both sides. You do this, and then you get to here, and you realize, man, this is really bad. So then you shift back. So now if this is all you're doing, right? If you're just going down this one avenue, you're not taking this scenic route over to PvP for even a little bit. Trying your hands at a little bit of trials, doing Iron Banner, playing comp, doing all these things. If you're not taking this avenue here, it's gonna feel stale because you're just playing the same thing over and over again and with what feels like no reason, right? Like once you have all your weapons, once you have all your god rolls, what reason do you have, right? Well, you could get into speedrunning. That's a thing, but speedrunning is very high skill and very tech oriented and requires a lot of like practice and skill and in something that could very quickly get patched and ruined. Flip side is if you practice in PvP, even though it wasn't in a great state for the longest time, even now, you're still going to learn something, but it's very frustrating because of how bad it currently is, and it feels very stale. Like PvP itself is very stale, right? So the whole game begins to shift and arc back. So you feel this across the board. So then, because you're not doing this avenue, you more directly analyze what's wrong with this side, which there's a decent amount, but it's not as bad as this is. So what we need to do is we need to recognize that, first of all, and secondly, we need a refresh across the board. One of the things that is actually stale is the loot is not exciting because most of our loot that drops is stuff we already have if we've been playing continuously. So if you're a new player to the game, this is a great time to get in because there's a lot of stuff from old seasons that's coming out that you're able to obtain god rolls of before going and diving into new stuff. When they update the world loot pool, which I expect to actually happen here fairly soon, when they update that, the game is going to feel less stale. But in terms of gameplay, the gameplay really hasn't changed over the course of the beginning of even Destiny 1. It's just now you've been playing it for a long time at thousands of hours, and you begin to realize, man, because I don't have this other avenue to even really attempt, I'm actually really not enjoying this side of the game as much, because what point is there to incessantly grind Nightfalls once I have all of the things that I want, other than for armor pieces, which you don't even really get from Nightfalls? So there's a lot of different like mini routes you can take, but there's no finite way to like go farm for perfect stat rolled armor. If we had a way to farm for perfect stat rolled armor, that would alleviate a lot of the staleness, because then you're chasing something, but we don't have that, and that makes it more frustrating. Gambit is a whole other issue that suffers from both the PvP and PvE side of things. It's quite literally the worst sides of both. And Gambit, unfortunately, whether you like Gambit as a game mode or not, it's a game mode that needs to exist now, because they've basically incorporated it into everyone's ritual systems. Whether you do it or not isn't up to you, but it does exist, and it is a part of the game's ecosystem now. So if you're gonna say to take out PvP, you also need to say take out Gambit until you come up with a solution. But then you're left with only one part of the game that isn't that great right now, and you're gonna really begin to see what's wrong with the game if you have no other avenues to take. Right now, what we need is we need an overhaul of the loot, because that's a big part of the game, is the loot, and we need more absorbed content. We need more of this, and as we're getting more, I'm beginning to realize how much potential we have now. The seasonal content has been very good. The story has been the story being a driving factor now has been really good. The seasonal game modes have something to be desired, but that's just, I think, the nature of those game modes. But we just don't have it's very clunky on the routes that you can take to play in the end game. And the end game just feels very like arbitrary. Like, why am I doing it? And that's a hard nut to crack, I think, even for Bungie. Felwinter's Lie was a bad reward, or should have been redone as a Rasputin themed version instead of Iron Bandana. So Felwinter's Lie was an amazing reward given the theme of the season, because Felwinter is Rasputin's son. And so Felwinter's Lie has a ton of lore tie-in, on top of being a fantastic reward for both PvE and PvP. In PvE, people aren't really using it as much, but it does have Vorpal weapon, and I mean that's something to account for. And I mean, it's just a cool gun. I mean, it's a nostalgic pull. It really was the beginning of like, okay, Bungie's gonna start kind of like reintroducing some of these really cool nostalgic things. And I think it was a great thing. To claim it was a bad reward, I think, is very poor. I just don't know. I think maybe we could have had something alongside Felwinter's Lie, but unfortunately, Season of the Worthy was just a bad season. Probably, arguably, the second worst season the game has ever seen. And we had an entire Gambit season. Think about that. I really hope somehow Bungie finds a way to make Teraba good. I agree. Teraba's a cool gun. It's a cool raid exotic. Conceptually, visually, the idea of it all, I think it's really cool. I just think that it suffers from something I've talked about before, which is the exotic primary issue. And exotic primaries just don't feel good. So exotic primaries across the board need love. And I think that is something that we can kind of all agree on. I think it's more than just Teraba that needs some love. All right, it's shady, but in the Discord server, my name is KibKib. If I'm going to be completely honest, and all I'm going to say is the truth, at least in my opinion, you know. So basically, I love the game, play it all the time. It's great, love the community, everyone's nice, and I've only seen or heard of a few toxic people. Of course, others may say differently, but yeah, the only downside is that once you get everything done, it's just boring. Like, I know we still have our activities, but then the grind isn't worth it anymore unless it's something really, really hard. what's the, you're not wrong. It's a matter of figuring out, right, and evaluating the part of the game that we want to play. Again, we don't have that other end game avenue, so there's really only one to take, and that's to do like Grandmaster Nightfalls, which if you're not well equipped for those or willing to kind of like give those an attempt, it really feels like there's nothing for you at the end. But then again, like, at what point do you put that bar, right? Like, where do you put the bar for what is endgame and who's going to play it and what are you going to be doing? There's this major conversation, and it kind of goes back to before, this conversation of like, well, who do you want to sell the game to? You know, your dedicated players are there for you all the time when they're spending money, but you also want new players coming in, so you have to have both sides of that spectrum. And so it feels like right now endgame players are being neglected, but we're also getting stuff now coming in that is like for us specifically. So not that we're not being unheard, rather it's that what could we possibly get that like is very beneficial to what we're looking for in the end game, right? Maybe if we could come up with a cool little thing that we could send to Bungie or like tweet at Bungie or whatever and be like, let's put this awesome formal write-up here of like this really cool concept of like what we would like to see, great. But that requires a lot of effort and a lot of people coming to voice an opinion. So we'd have to compile all that and have our own little community summit, basically. But then again, how much of that is going to be weighed down by literally everybody's wants and needs? And that's the tough part. So we have to remember Bungie only has so much time, and time is a resource, and they only have so many resources. So we need to respect their time just as much as they need to be respecting ours, and I think we're starting to get there. It's just taking a long time, which is unfortunate, but that's just the truth. All right. Crow should be huggable. Also, certain stasis things, cough cough Behemoth got Nova Warped IMO. I like that there's more use of light subclasses in PvP, but Behemoth feels bad in even PvE. There's too many exotics in the game. Sometimes I don't know what to use and what's good anymore. I don't know what to do about it, but I just think there's too many. Lore this season is awesome, but frick Lakshmi. A lot of people keep asking for a stat screen after raids, but sure, it would be cool. But I feel like there's a lot of people that would use it to hold their damage numbers over others who don't have as much experience and feel bad about raiding. I don't really have that many hot takes. I always kind of enjoy the game the way it is, besides the fact they removed the Izzy reload cancel that doesn't get affected by Luna's well anymore for some reason. Also, speedy flying warlocks, Sag. But other than those big changes that already happened, like sunsetting and raids going into the vault, I don't really have much to say. Destiny's still Destiny. I still enjoy killing or teaming up with aliens. That was all. They did mention Behemoth is being looked at to be tuned up in PvE. They agree. I don't know if that there's too many exotics in the game. It's just that there's too many niche, narrow exotics that we don't use. So it just feels like we're relegated to very few. Knowing what's good and what's not good is more about just researching for yourself, I think. It's very much so about playing the game and then learning what you enjoy using. In terms of meta, there will be 102 video guides that just seem to sum up exactly what you need to know, but I feel like it's playing at your pace, and that's sometimes what's more fun. So it's kind of like one of those deal. I agree, lore is great. Stat screen after used to exist in D1. Players used it to be incredibly toxic. It's kind of like using a damage meter in another MMO. There's a reason why they don't like them. They have great tools that can help you be a better player, but it can also increase excessive amounts of toxicity. All in all, I agree. Izzy reload cancel, I think I'm glad it went away. I think that it was, they don't like things like that. But I mean, it was kind of fun too. So I don't know. But I think that all in all, the game is in a good place in terms of PvE. And the things that they mention here are all pretty standard, I'd say. I wouldn't say any of these are really hot takes anyways. Thoughts of the current PvP meta. I'm not educated enough on PvP to really give my interpretation, other than apparently stasis is in a good place now? Question mark. Bellwinters is not a problem in PvP. People who keep complaining about getting killed by shotguns need to evaluate their play and why they keep letting enemies get within shotgun range. Okay. Whew. Shotguns are not a problem. Map sizes and our current speed. It's not about that they're getting within the range, it's that players are moving faster than you can kill them to get within that range. Movement is definitely important, but shotgun prevalence is inherently coupled with how fast we are moving. And if we had a larger map size / slowed down PvP, this would be an entirely different thing. The time to kills on guns don't equate to what a one-shot kill could do. It's a sum-zero game. If I get a kill with a shotgun from a half a mile away and it takes you 3 shots to kill me, I'm going to have the advantage every time. As long as I'm not dead and you are, I won the fight, right? So why wouldn't I do that? So Fellwinters is not the issue. It's how fast we can move and how the map sizes are. I would argue that it's not just players being bad at playing against Fellwinters. This is kind of like saying, don't ever peek a sniper lane if you don't know, because there will always be a sniper there, right? Like you're basically saying it's your fault that you're dying there all the time, so you need to fix it. But the problem is not the player, it's the weapons and the movement. Current state of Destiny. I would love to see lore incorporated in a different way. Right now I notice a lot of people just click their triumph and then the lore tabs just to get the symbol to go away, or aren't even aware that they can unlock lore with triumphs in the first place. Destiny is such a rich story, and so much of it, I think having lore take a more forward position in things could really benefit the overall state of things and really immerse people in the verse. We are getting that more with the story. I think where they're at with the story is a really good balance of getting people interested in the lore without making them throw themselves at it. If you like surface level stories and you want that episodic nature, they've hit it really, really well. Would it be nice to see more lore incorporated? Sure. But I think there's a certain amount of, you should only be required to do it if it interests you, right? And I think that's what's nice about how they've integrated the lore now. I think that it's not necessarily that it's a bad thing that players decide to just skip reading the lore. They just choose not to enjoy that part of the game, and that's perfectly fine and valid. I think that players just choose to utilize their time in the way that means the most to them. And there are players out there that love the lore, and that's all they care about is the lore. And I think that's great. But I don't think that you should force players to try and fall in love with something that they may not fall in love with in the first place. I think it's more important to have players enjoy the game for what it is, give them a decent thing to hook them in, and then they make the active decision to go further with it. But if they choose to remain surface level and just hear from other people what's going on, that should be their respected right to do that too. And I think that's fair. I think the way that the lore currently is way better than it used to be. And I think what they've done with the story now and kind of giving us these nice little hooks is great. Spicer weapons are not that exciting. What gives? Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Bro. Chroma Rush? Grid Skipper? The LMG is pretty hot. I mean, sidearms are sidearms. But like, I would say that they're pretty exciting. And it's I think the perks too, right? Like, just the consistency in the perks and just how they feel and how they look. I think they're pretty awesome. But I mean, maybe Cyberpunk meets whatever that movie is called that I can't think of the name of off the top of my head right now. Tron. I think that's a cool little mesh. I think it's kind of like a neat little take. Something different than we've had. Kind of nice to see it be a little bit different. I think that's cool. Still don't have a leg cam OnlyFans. Okay, listen. It's being worked on. It's being worked on. DMT is the bane of all existence. It needs to be thrown into the sun. Yes, I agree. All drugs need to be thrown into the sun. They're bad for your health. Dead Man's Tale, though. Dead Man's Tale is... I've seen this a lot. I'm seeing more of it. I just think it's slightly overtuned. I don't think it's that it's the bane of all existence. I think it's these type of knee-jerk reactions that are causing a lot of issues and a lot of contention between the PvE and PvP player base. Because it's this type of a reaction that causes things to be nerfed so hard when it didn't need an incredible nerf. I've seen this in other games that do frequent buffs and nerfs, like League of Legends. And when the community outrages like this, the company panics because obviously players are going to leave and whatever. So to maintain those players, they nerf it so far, but I don't think that it needs that. It just needs to be tuned down. I don't think that I think that it's kind of like last word in the sense, and ironically, in the sense that like it just needs either a numbers change or a RPM change or something, just a little bit to bring it in line. I mean, look at what they did with 120 hand cannons. Those feel fine now. 140s definitely feel a lot better than they ever did. 180s are a whole other issue. Chroma Rush is something that I'm seeing a lot of again. Like auto rifles are kind of starting to make a little bit of a comeback. I heard 450s are actually okay now. Not amazing, but not terrible. Even like Grid Skipper, a pulse rifle, is seeing some usage. So we're seeing more variety. And with the stasis nerfs overall, the sandbox feels way better. I think you're never... Here's the thing. You're never going to topple the kings, right? Like, you're going to have things that are going to be strong at all points. So if you nerf everything to Oblivion or you buff everything to Heaven, like, one or two things will happen. Your game will be no fun, or your game is going to be so overpowered that no one wants to play because they don't want to play laser tag weekend every weekend. While it's strong, I don't know if it's so strong that we need to completely remove it from existence. I think it's just that it's one of those things that it just needs to be brought in line where other exotics are. And here's the thing, is exotics are exotic. It's your one slot, it's the slot you're choosing to use, right? So I feel like exotics do need to be a slight bar above the legendary contenders that they can be. I think what a lot of people are experiencing are two things that maybe was an unintended consequence of the gun, which is Heat Rises Warlocks and Lion Rampant hip firing Titans. Because I'm going to ask you right now, how many hunters with a DMT have killed you? It's less about, I think it's less about the overall gun and more about the fact the gun creates or elevates a playstyle that we're not used to seeing, especially. So I would like to maybe see where the gun goes in addition to figuring out how to counter this playstyle. I don't disagree that it needs a tuning. I think that it does need to maybe be dialed back just a touch. But I think instead of trying to do this with it, right, here's DMT now, here's post nerf, I'd like to see something more like this. Just bring it over to here, you know, bring it to Hawk Moon Land, bring it to Last Word Land, bring it to, you know, something like this. I think this is fair. So the next part of the video, I'm going to give you guys a hot take of mine, and I want you guys to talk back at me and see what you guys think. Actually, I kind of mentioned it before. The reaction that the PvP community has to certain playstyles and certain strategies is exceptionally reactionary and creates this very divisive style of response that puts Bungie in a position where they feel as though if they don't handle it immediately, that the game mode will die or we will leave the game. And I think it's a very poor way of getting your feedback across and sort of invalidates any future arguments you may have. And here's a good example. It's kind of like the kid at the grocery store that's crying about the thing that they don't get. And I understand that PvP needs love and that's respected, but I think that the constant and incessant amounts of complaining about everything all the time and expecting things to be nerfed to oblivion instead of expecting things like minor adjustments are what caused these issues in the first place that we have with PvP not seeing a functionality or seeing updates as frequently as they maybe needed it. A couple examples are when 120 hand cannons recently got their balance pads before the stasis nerfs. People were very upset because they said 120 hand cannons were still too strong, and they said that it wasn't enough. But they didn't look at the fact that we didn't get stasis nerfs, and people are now saying, okay, maybe they are actually in a better place than we thought, and everything was just based around the fact that stasis was that strong. This happens a lot, I've noticed, in the Destiny community, where when things are talked about being adjusted in a certain ways, the community has this like pitchfork mentality that I think is very poor and doesn't represent a good case to the company for future times that we want things adjusted. A good current example is hot swapping that does need to be addressed, and they clearly removed quick draw for a reason, and we're circumventing that. Whether you're for or against it, this is just the truth of the matter. And the position needs to be, okay, so even if it does get removed from the game, how much does it actually affect what we're doing? So there you go. Tell me what you think. Let me know. I want to have this discussion.